And we're back. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is Nerd News with Destiny, and I'm Destiny. And this week there is a break, of course. In shows, we get The Falcon and the Winter Soldier on Friday, but last week there wasn't anything. So I have a great interview for you instead. I interviewed Matt Blairstone, who is a Portlander, a comics creator, and recently he has donned his editing hat because he is editing a monster 200-page horror anthology called Green Inferno, The World Celebrates Your Demise. Now, without further ado, let's talk comics. Now, right now, Green Inferno, The World Celebrates Your Demise, has a Kickstarter up, and I talked to Matt about what kind of people might like this horror anthology, and the answer is lots of people. So it's terrestrial-based horror, as Matt will explain in just a moment. I'm introing it, hello. Please pretend my hair looks the same. Continuity issues, who am I, Marvel? Am I gonna leave that in? This horror anthology brings people from all around the world, writers and illustrators and comics creators, to create this terrestrial-based horror, if you will. And if you're like me and you like horror comics, but you're also a big old wimp who cries at stuff, you might think to yourself, wow, the world is scary enough. Why horror? Well, Matt has an explanation for that too, and it's a pretty relatable one, to be honest. We also talk about production in the time of COVID-19, especially in an industry that took a really big hit. I mean, a lot of industries did, but we saw lots of sort of kerfluffle in the comics industry, and if you're watching this video, you probably know what I'm talking about. Alright, that's enough from me. Let's talk to past me with different hair and also Matt Blairstone. You are a comics creator, but we're talking about a project that you began editing, a very large project in the pandemic, when I have to say most people's productions probably tanked. Seems like you've taken on a very large responsibility. Can you tell me a little bit about that anthology?
Called Green Inferno. The World Celebrates Our Demise is the full subtitle for it.
Which I thought was very funny and catchy to me. Like, the world would celebrate our demise, honestly. We're a little mean to it.
It's a little tongue-in-cheek, but not very tongue-in-cheek, It's an anthology of ecologically centered horror fiction and comics from a group of creators from all over the world. In this case, it's a lot of people from the US, but some from Canada, Japan, Romania, Italy. The pitch I tried to use when I was talking to them was that it was terrestrial horror, stories about or centering on the earth, not necessarily man versus nature. That could get old pretty quickly if every story was, facing a raging tornado or whatever, but that was a good jumping off point. Basically, I wanted to have it kind of fall under that umbrella. Things that not necessarily things that happen off world, but just kind of keeping it terrestrial.
Yeah, absolutely. And so talk to me a little bit about being an editor on a project with so many voices. Like, I kind of have no idea what that world looks like.
The most challenging aspect of it, honestly, was my rather bullheaded insistence on handling every aspect of production myself, at least for now. So I've been a comics nerd and a horror nerd for my whole life, but I've written sporadically fiction on and off, but I've only really gotten into making comics for about the last 7 years of my life. I kind of came into it late. It was an intentional swerve to get away from some destructive paths that I was going down, and this was just a good way to kind of crystallize my vision in a lot healthier fashion. And the best way I found to do it was to kind of take my lifelong education in comics, and as in being a reader, and just kind of reverse engineer it, teaching myself how to draw and color and letter and layout and design and self-publish, basically. Instead of just focusing on one aspect, I wanted to kind of touch on everything. And so I'm kind of doing that with Green Inferno again, learning Adobe InDesign software and putting on an editorial hat that I've never worn in the past, diving back into, quarantine. I've definitely produced a lot more short fiction and things of that nature than I have in recent years. So it's been kind of a new crash course. And I think it's all kind of part of my overall desire to to build sort of a micro community of people who are just passionate and have things to say and want to get their voices out there. And I like to be able, I'm a fairly introverted person. I don't play social media that great. I'm not a good huckster. I don't pitch myself very well, and I'm just not very interested in the game, as much as I know that it is a valuable and necessary tool in this day and age. But I kind of just wanted to use building blocks and create my own community with people that seem to be of a like mind and are enthusiastic about, in this case, horror. Some of them fiction, some of them comics, and just seeing if I can keep it going, keep it growing.
But I love that, because that's something that I love about both. I love punk music and also comics, is like that real DIY spirit. And I think such really like cool things come from that kind of thing. So I love to hear that. And I know that a lot of people who are into like independent comics, it's a little bit of a different beast if you only read the big two or big three, which is fine. There's no judgment. But I know that there's such a large following for people who are into that like DIY spirit.
I love pop comics too. I grew up on 70s Marvel. And I still keep up with what's going on with the big two. I keep up what's going on with the self-published stuff and what's going on at Image and Dark Horse and Oni and Boom, and I mean, I love the industry. I work part-time at a shop here in Portland. Haven't since the quarantine started, but I do like to keep my fingers on what's actually going on in the industry, even though I'm not really of the industry. I'm kind of I'm not a small fish in the big pond. I'm kind of like algae, but algae has a purpose too. It has a lot of good uses. So I'm kind of content to keep swimming in my little area, but I definitely am looking to bring some more people into the fold. Definitely.
That's super cool. And it seems like you really have gotten a crew together of really, really talented artists. If you check out that Kickstarter, I was looking at it, there's some samples of the kind of stuff that's in there. And it's really like a wide range of like very, very cool stuff. I'm sort of a like novice, like baby to horror comics, but I really enjoyed them. So I'm super excited to read this and hope it, becomes fully funded, because as I was reading on your Kickstarter, a lot of that's going to make sure that you're paying the creators fairly, which is of course a hot topic in comics, and we don't have to debate that, but I'm just saying, I think that that's super cool, and people would be interested, I think, to know that while giving money to this project. But one of my big questions for you is like, how do you, and you may have gotten this question before, or maybe you're sick to talk about it and you can let me know, but like, man, my production in quarantine, gotta say, has tanked a little bit. And so I'm so impressed to hear that not only have you brought on this very large project, but like you said, you've been working on sorts of fiction and stuff like that. Like, how do you stay motivated when you kind of have seen the ripple effect of what quarantine has done, particularly to the comics business?
Well, I was doing, so my day job before the dome came down was I was doing accounting and office management for a restaurant in Portland. I'm from the restaurant industry mostly, for most of my life. It's a steady paycheck, not a good paycheck, but there's always work to be found. And I've been able to kind of transition over time to having less of a job that I have to take home with me, but still staying in the industry, working with contacts that I've made. Anyway, so quarantine happened, and that obviously went by the wayside. All the restaurants closed down. My son's preschool closed down. So my wife is she's the legit artist of the family. She's a surface pattern designer and a custom wallpaper designer. And so she was able to keep working from home, and keeping an eye on the boy became my job, which is great. That could be worse. And obviously the comics industry, along with everyone else, screeched to a halt. And I watched a lot of my contacts or peers and what have you just kind of scrambling and flailing. And there was a lot of talk from a lot of corners. Everyone had ideas about, what are we going to do? Let's try to do this. There was a lot of ambition to, now that there is no industry, the sky's the limit. Let's all just try something crazy. But balancing that with the depression and the anguish that everyone was feeling, that serves as like the ultimate killer of creativity, I'm bound by that dichotomy too. Some days I'm bursting with 1,000 ideas. Sometimes my computer screen is, an enemy. And then like there's an endless stream of bad news, like, COVID, and obviously the political upheaval and the social, all the injustice and everything that was going on last year. And honestly, for me, it culminated with the forest fires here in Portland. The one time we actually tried to get out and do something normal, we were going to go and see my wife's mother and her grandmother in Lincoln City, spend a couple days there, rent a house, had been cleaned and be socially distanced and whatnot. And as soon as we got there, the smoke wafted in and the power went out. And we actually found ourselves kind of, the next day, Lincoln City, there were sirens going off and evacuation notices. And we didn't know, all of the cell phone technology was down. So we didn't know if there was infernos raging half a mile away or 3 miles away. It's kind of a treacherous situation to get out of. We got home eventually, and suddenly we're familiarizing ourselves with checking our AQI on our phones every 15 minutes and not opening the windows. And I'd always taken too much for granted being able to open our windows. And that was kind of the low point for us personally, was that stretch of the sky being this kind of pestilential yellow gray color. And that's where Green Inferno, the idea came from. It's a round world, and like COVID is touching every single corner of it, and climate crisis is touching every single corner of it. And the rise in anti-science and anti-vaxxers and all of that in recent months that depresses me as much as anything. And I'm not necessarily on a pedestal, but this is sort of a call to arms, at least from the horror aspect, I guess. And so where I wasn't able to, at times when I wasn't able to create, I could at least kind of rally up people who were and try to assemble like people from, I didn't know any of these people. I did some open calls and reached out to a few names in the comics industry, just looking for people who were hungry, and everyone could kind of pick each other up and provide something to get through a very, very strange year.
Yeah, it's putting it lightly. Speaking of, I think that's the third time I've ever heard thunder in Portland since I've been here for almost 2 years. Sorry about that. I don't know if you can hear it. It was very loud.
I did.
I'm from Florida, so we get a different kind of rain where it thunders all the time. So I'm very shocked to hear it.
Yeah,
But anyways,
rippling. We're in North Portland, and it just rippled past. So.
But I think that that's really cool. So the idea, I didn't mean to make it sound like you were not touched by everything that happened and you stayed the most, productive, blah, blah, blah. But I think that it's really cool that of these sort of terrible things, there's a couple of ways you can handle that. And that's up to you personally. But sort of creating something out of that, I think, is a really great way to sort of handle it. And as a journalist, I can definitely, of course, relate, though you write horror and I write news, but, it's different but the same. My next question, though, I guess, as somebody who's interested in horror but doesn't really know a ton about it, like, why horror? Like, why? It seems like I'm already scared about everything that's going on in the world, so why lean into something scary?
It's funny. My wife is an anti-horror person as well, so we don't share a lot of the same viewing. But I was actually thinking about this question last night. I was watching a movie called The Dark and the Wicked on Shudder, a streaming service, and it's a modern horror film, and it's very heavy. It's very morose. It's very emotionally uncomfortable, dealing with a lot of grief and death and loss and guilt. And it's the kind of horror that does make me uncomfortable. At least it's a mode that pokes at my discomfort. And I like that because I don't scare easily. I tend to revel in stories that can manage to actually successfully get under my skin. And I think it's kind of a way of pondering your own mortality. There are some people who become very uncomfortable with that and run from that subject. And there are people who get very obsessed with it and dive into it. And I'm not either of those things. And I don't think there's a good or a bad way to deal with it. But there's certainly been, we are in a period of time where we've all had way too much time to be dwelling on it. Why I have not gotten turned off of horror over the span of the last 12 months, I can't answer that question. I think it's just too ingrained in me. There's a simpler answer, and that is my lizard brain, my state of suspended childhood. I've never lost the fascination with old scary monster movies and 70s comic books and Count Chocula cereal. And, you know, I was a total monster kid. And then, like I said earlier, when I kind of course corrected my life a few years ago, I clung on to the building blocks that had kind of sculpted my geekdom, whether it was punk rock and comics and black and white monster movies and pulpy old science fiction with ray guns and fantasy and 60s, you know, like psychedelic aesthetics. I just kind of threw all those things in a blender to make my comic series Mad Doctors. And then I tried to build a world that made cohesive sense out of all of these disparate elements. I got totally off of track, but why horror? It's both a combination of the philosophical explorations and just I'm just a monster kid at heart, I guess.
For what it's worth, I think that's a great answer. I think people who maybe don't engage with, you know, they hear any kind of horror and sort of turn off and kind of can't understand maybe why people would be consuming this kind of content when the world seems scary. But, you know, like I read these studies all the time about people who have anxiety, who view horror, I think I mentioned this to you in the email, like view horror because it's controlled anxiety, and they know that there are no real negative consequences here. It's just a good, fun time.
It's true. It's like, you know, there's the whole, just as simple as an endorphin rush that you can get from a scare, the same way you get from a laugh, you know, at least for me. For some people, you know, just walking up to that edge is too much. And I can totally understand that, you know. Don't subject yourself to something that's making you miserable. But, you know, there are just certain people who lean into horror for that kind of release, and I'm definitely trying to reach out to those people, I guess.
Yeah, that's really cool. And you mentioned sort of being a monster kid, and in the Kickstarter, it sort of mentions Swamp Thing as a sort of maybe not inspiration, but sort of comparable. If you like this, you may like this sort of situation. Can you sort of expound on that? The types of things
Sure.
that, you know, people might be interested in.
Alan Moore's Swamp Thing is certainly not a deep dive on like comics lore. It's a popular one, but it's probably my favorite run from comics ever, and it was a total mashup of like big monster movies and really probing philosophical ideas. I think that some of the vibe that I'm looking for with Green Inferno, there was a book called The Low Woods that came out last year from Joe Hill, Stephen King's son, had a comics imprint through DC last year, and it was by Carmen Maria Machado and the artist Danny. That was a fantastic book, really creepy, really moody, great atmosphere. Charles Burns, Pacific Northwest kind of underground cartoonist, did a series called Black Hole about 15 years ago, and that was a really influential book for me. Also, I think if you're a fan of John Carpenter films or David Cronenberg films, those are a really good touchstone for what I'm trying to do with Green Inferno, as well as the books of Caitlin McKiernan and Jeff Vandermeer, two people who kind of deal in not necessarily like gory horror, but kind of like walk you into a weird, like the weird unsettling vibe of Lovecraftian, you know, without some of the problematic aspects that come along with that. That's also, I'm also I'm a total old school Lovecraft fan too, and I couldn't be more thrilled with how his work is getting a reevaluation, because his DNA is so built into horror that it's impossible to strip a certain kind of horror. You know, you have to address what a mammoth he was in the industry, and in turn you have to address what a problematic SOB he also is. And I think there is a way, without, you know, eliminating that from the talk, from the conversation, to deal with it in a provocative, in a forward-thinking way. And I'm really happy to see that being done in the mainstream, honestly, with Lovecraft Country that came out last year, I believe, on HBO. I actually haven't seen it, but, you know, these are good conversations to be having, and I think it helps move horror forward, definitely.
That's such a great point. So I read the thing about if you're interested basically in Lovecraftian things, this may be something you're interested in terms of Green Inferno. And I was like, I wonder how they mean
Yeah,
that. So it's very clear how you mean it. The cornerstone of a lot of horror, minus the problematic things.
yeah, you
Um,
know,
and this question is just for fun, and it may
sure.
be asking you to pick a favorite child, and maybe you can't. But is there a story that particularly resonated with you so far of the ones that you've looked at that you thought just wow, like this is
Yeah, there's
the
one that
type of thing I'm trying to create here?
there's two different things that kind of answer that question. There was one story that grabbed me early on, and it's called A Strange Finch. It's by Lorna, sorry, Lorna Keach, yes, is her name. Um, and it's about a very wealthy, entitled man whose thing is to eat exotic foods, and the lengths that he'll go to procure new culinary delights, and the inevitable twist that takes. It's got a bit of comedy to it, very dark, but that was one of my favorites early on. And then as I was kind of assembling it, I realized that I had selected some really excellent comics for it, like and like talked to some people that I really wanted to work with, but the horror was kind of leaning towards a bit more conventional, for lack of a better term. And I came across a couple of artists on Instagram that I wasn't familiar with, named Harry Nordlinger and Michael Filatico. And they kind of do some stuff that's a bit seedier in a way. It's got more of an underground comics vibe, some of that like 70s, kind of schlocky style. And I mean that in the best possible sense. Just stuff that really creeps under your skin. And Harry was doing a book. He actually, you say that I'm putting off a veneer of being productive during quarantine. I say thank you, but he's put out like 3 collections of this book, Vacuum Decay, during quarantine, which is just an amazing book. I can't recommend it more. Anyway, I roped him in to do kind of a framing sequence for the story. He's doing a bunch of different shorts that are scattered throughout Green Inferno. And that was just like the missing ingredient. I felt like it brought kind of just a dirtier feeling to the whole project, which I really like.
Yeah, for me, that's some of the more frightening aspects of it's like if the art follows the story in terms of like how unsettling it is, it's immediately much more unsettling to me. You know what I mean?
Certainly.
I think it's called Black Stars Above. I read recently,
Yeah.
and that was very frightening to me.
Adler, I think, wrote that.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And so I felt a lot the same that way. But yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to see where this goes, and I love the spirit of this campaign, sort of funded by readers, paying your authors fairly. That's like something that's important to this project. And
yeah, I know it's not a secret, but artists in every medium, as you well know, are severely underappreciated for their talents, and there's an ongoing conversation on a greater scale, and then there's even a new twist on it, which I'm trying to wrap my head around the whole crypto art thing, which I'm not ready to dive into that whole.
Now look, there's just under 2 weeks left of this Kickstarter, but I think this is a really, really cool project. Not only because the idea of terrestrial horror really appeals to me, but also because I think it's so cool to be so upfront about what your intentions are for the money that you're gathering from people who will be receiving this book. You know what I mean? I think it's really cool that they strive to pay their artists and creators fairly, that this is sort of just a really big collaborative effort. I mean, you're getting a lot of bang for your buck. 200 pages of terrestrial horror, and you saw some of the stuff. I mean, it looks incredible. I, for one, am very excited about it, and I think if you're interested in horror comics, that you should maybe back this Kickstarter if you can, or if you can't, maybe just spread the word. It's great to support our local comic creators and also comic creators from all over the world. We're all sort of in this together, and me as a wee journalist, all I can do is spread the word. So here I am spreading the word. Thanks again so much to Matt Blairstone, and please check out Green Inferno, The World Celebrates Your Demise Kickstarter. I'm Destiny Johnson. I will see you guys next week, same-ish time, same place, and until then, this has been Nerd News with Destiny.